Tonight, the shooting at a California synagogue.
We forcefully condemn the evil of anti-Semitism and hate.
And the president's condemnation. Attacks on places of worship ahead of a new report on the plight of religious freedom around the world. And analyzing Joe Biden's place in the 2020 race.
The point of capitalism is not for me and you to get richer.
Plus, a new blockbuster on American enterprise and the pursuit of happiness. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Security stepped up across the country in the wake of another synagogue shooting. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Bratter. The country is pausing to remember the heroes behind the latest attack on a house of worship.
Details are starting to emerge and providing an outline of what took place during that shooting in which one person was killed and 3 others were hurt at the Chabad of Poway Synagogue Saturday. Amber Strong has the story.
Jews from around the nation stood united with their brothers at Chabad of Poway as the country grapples with the aftermath of yet another anti-Semitic attack. During a Holocaust memorial ceremony at the Capitol, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Ron Dermer reminded attendees of all they'd overcome.
From Tehran to Toulouse, from Pittsburgh to Poway, 3 simple Hebrew words: Am Yisrael Chai. Israel lives.
Rabbi Israel Goldstein, who lost a finger during Saturday's shooting, says it's all too familiar.
This is not supposed to happen. This isn't Nazi Germany. This isn't a pogrom.
But out of the tragedy, tales of heroism, selfless acts like that of Lori Kay, who was killed after jumping in front of Goldstein.
So Lori laying on the floor unconscious.
And Ahmaud Peretz, who came back time and again, ushering children to safety. And Oscar Stewart, an Iraq War veteran who chased down the gunman.
I ran up to him and I yelled at him and he dropped his weapon and he ran out.
The shooter, 19-year-old John Ernest, was taken into custody. During Sunday services, his pastor, Reverend Zach Keel, called the acts evil.
Today is an evil day, for evil has gone out from us and we did not know it.
Keel also preaching a sermon of love for all.
We must love all our neighbors, all of God's humans created in the image of God from every tribe, nation, and language.
His message echoing that of Rabbi Goldstein.
Terrorism will not win, but peace and love will.
Ernest is being held without bail on 1 count of murder and 3 counts of first-degree attempted murder. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Amber. Well, today the family of the accused shooter expressed shock and sadness. In a statement, they said Ernest is part of the history of evil, and that is to their great shame.
Well, Rabbi Abraham Cooper is the Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He joins us now. Thanks for being with us, Rabbi.
Thanks for having me.
Rabbi, you know, this is, of course, just the latest in a string of killings in houses of worship. Before, Charleston, say, there were shootings, but it felt like these places were safe, and that's no longer the case. What is happening in the United States?
Well, I think what we're looking at, unfortunately, is, a copycat approach. The shooter from Pittsburgh, the shooter here in San Diego and New Zealand, across the board, where you see a copycat approach on really learning lessons from ISIS. We now are going to have to be dealing with a new subculture online, mostly from social media, in which domestic terrorists, some of them Islamists, some of them extreme far-right, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, they've absorbed some of the lessons of the approach of ISIS in terms of the internet and social media. And so, beyond our heartfelt prayers, the martyred woman, that wonderful lady, her brother is a member of our synagogue in West Los Angeles. So we feel it intensely as a family. But beyond the prayers, God helps those who help themselves. All faith communities now have to awaken to the fact that we are targets, potential targets of terrorists, domestic and foreign.
this leads right to this next point. You wrote in an LA Times op-ed that we can and should increase training in hardened churches, synagogues, and mosques, but that won't necessarily stop hate. What will?
Well, we know from our biblical lessons that hate is a part of the human condition. The challenge is, how do the forces of love and solidarity and mutual respect marginalize and defeat the forces of hate? That takes heavy lifting, not just by governments, but by families, by clergy, by faith communities, and by reaching out and remembering that even those who don't believe are our brothers and sisters. We have to both harden the physical targets and find ways to soften the hearts and sense of solidarity between peoples of different faiths. And we're well suited in the United States to achieve that, better than any other country in the world.
Well, Rabbi Cooper, we are sorry to be meeting under these circumstances, but it's always good to see you. Thank you.
God bless.
Well, President Trump called Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein over the weekend to offer his condolences.
And he's now sharing about it, saying he's, quote, grateful the commander-in-chief took the time to call him. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the White House. Ben?
Well, Jenna, Rabbi Goldstein says the two talked for about 15 minutes and called the conversation comforting. He said the president spoke about his love of peace, Judaism, and Israel. Trump reached out on Twitter today, calling the rabbi a great guy, adding that all he wanted to do is help others. He echoed that during a rally in Wisconsin over the weekend.
Our entire nation mourns the loss of life, prays for the wounded, and stands in solidarity with the Jewish community. We forcefully condemn the evil of anti-Semitism and hate, which must be defeated.
Now, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders chimed in right here behind me on the driveway earlier today, saying despite cuts to anti-extremist programs, the administration is working to combat this issue. President Trump was quick to speak out, calling this attack a hate crime. John, Jenna?
Ben, a little bit of a hard turn here on an unrelated story. We're hearing that a subpoena battle is brewing between lawmakers in the White House where you are. Tell us about that.
John, you're right. Attorney General William Barr is set to testify on Capitol Hill later this week for a Q&A on the Mueller report, but now lawmakers want to have him questioned by staff lawyers. Barr said, look, not so fast, and plans to refuse to appear if the committee decides to go that route. If Barr doesn't show up, lawmakers could actually issue a subpoena for his testimony. But again, it's only Monday, so lots can change as we move forward in the week. John, Jenna?
Yeah. Yes, so true. All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House. Thank you. Well, to campaign 2020, Biden's big pitch in Pittsburgh. The former vice president is betting his working-class roots will carry him along in a traditionally blue state that went red for President Trump in 2016. It comes as Biden is finding favor among union leaders. Today, picking up the official endorsement of the International Association of Firefighters. That endorsement not welcome news to President Trump, who took to Twitter saying, I will never get the support of dues-crazy union leadership, those people who rip off their membership with ridiculously high dues, medical and other expenses while being paid a fortune. But the members love Trump. Joe Biden quickly responded, tweeting himself, I am sick of this president bad-mouthing unions. Labor's built the middle class in this country. We need a president who honors them and their work. And here with us to talk about the former vice president's 2020 chances and challenges are NCBN News chief political analyst David Brody and James Steele, a columnist and Washington bureau chief for The Economist. Both of you, thank you for being here.
Thanks. James, let me start with you. Biden's big pitch in Pittsburgh is really highlighting his working class roots and his ability to connect with voters that Hillary Clinton didn't do such a great job connecting with. Is this his strategy?
It's a big part of it, for sure. I guess he wants to show that he can win those Midwestern, upper Midwestern voters, those voters who, it's become a sort of truism on the left, were responsible for delivering states that normally voted Democratic to Trump in 2016, hence delivering Hillary Clinton her defeat. If he can show that he has real purchase with those voters, then he would hope that the non-white Democratic voters who dominate the southern states will sort of roll behind his candidacy as the primary moves south later on. So if you like, it's a two-punch strategy, but starting with the white working class in the upper Midwest, yes.
In 2016, there was a lot of talk, of course, about Biden jumping in then. Of course, the Democratic Party was pretty different then than it is now. David, did he kind of miss his window? Can he win in 2018? Is he relevant?
Well, he thinks so. We'll see. I think, as James, what he was saying is a good point. I mean, that he needs to win these voters over for sure. But I think there's a big debate within the Democrat Party now. Are those voters lost for good? In other words, those Reagan Democrats, those moderate Democrats, those blue-collar Democrats. Trump received many of those votes, and there's a lot of folks in the Democrat Party, at least they're telling me, that, forget it. The party's moved left. Those voters are gone for good. Focus on millennials, focus on suburban women, focus on minorities. That's the way to do it. The problem there, though, is that those are pretty much untested in terms of making sure they can turn out in droves to defeat a president like President Trump.
Maybe a question for the both of you. What about the accusations of inappropriate touching? Will that sink him among Democrats, especially in the Me Too era? David, maybe start with you and then get to James.
It's a hurdle. Because of the Me Too movement, for sure. But I think ultimately Joe Biden's going to have to just be Joe Biden and let it rip. And I think what we saw on The View the other day was Joe Biden not being Joe Biden. He was very calm, or he was very cautious when he came out on stage. He was shaking people's hands, and the only person he gave a hug to was Meghan McCain, because he would have to give a hug to Meghan McCain because of their relationship. But it was still very, very guarded. And I think if he continues to be guarded, it won't be Joe Biden. And the best part of Joe Biden is being authentic. So you have to stay with who you are. That's what got Trump elected in the first place.
I take issue with that a little bit. I think that if Joe Biden is the politician that we've seen in the last decade and more, he will lose this primary.
Well, I would agree with you.
But Biden has run for president twice before, flunked disastrously both times, and started in a much more low-key position during his two previous runs, and therefore had a lot less flack thrown at him. Right. He is undisciplined, he is gaffe-prone, and he's undisciplined and gaffe-prone in ways that don't lend themselves to this modern activist Democratic Party.
It's interesting you describe him as gaffe-prone and undisciplined. Some might say the same thing of the current sitting president.
Sure, and if Biden gets to a general election contest against Trump, those things won't be problems because of the contrast with Trump. But his priority is, of course, to get through a Democratic primary, sure. And that is a very different hurdle for him to approach.
But just real quick, the reason it's different with Trump is that for Trump, it's not a gaffe. It's who he is. I mean, in other words, it's to his persona. He's already a 1970s, 1980s guy that has all the baggage, so people were able to accept it. I'm not saying it's right, but they were able to accept it more easily. With Joe Biden, he's a U.S. sitting senator for X amount of years. So, when he does a gaffe, it takes on a different meaning because of the position that he had to begin with.
One final thought on that. He has agency. It's not these historical problems don't sink his candidacy, or it's not sort of in the lap of the gods whether Democratic voters are going to mind them or not. What matters is how Biden approaches these skeletons in his closet, if you like, how he talks about them, his judgment in deciding when he needs to apologize, when he needs to defend himself or explain past positions that he took on what might now seem to be controversial policy positions. And this is always the case, actually. The past things in a politician's record only really matter as long as they're not egregious, insofar as they highlight strengths or weaknesses of the politician today. Voters want to know what kind of man they might be electing today. And the fear for Biden, I think, is that the gaffes and the indiscipline are precisely what makes voters worry about him right now. So he needs to show that he has, better judgment and more self-restraint than he has shown in the past, and his gaffes, his spotted record, are absolutely sort of indicative of that problem, I think.
David and James, thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, there's now a new video confirmation that the leader of Islamic State survived the terror group's defeat in Syria and Iraq. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi appeared in a new video released today, congratulating the suicide bombers who carried out the Sri Lankan attacks on churches and hotels on Easter Sunday. He also mentions the recent ISIS losses in Syria's civil war. These are the first images of al-Baghdadi to surface since the summer of 2014, when he declared the creation of an Islamic caliphate. He's thought to be hiding in either the Iraqi or Syrian desert.
Well, for more on the ISIS leader, we have CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
George, it's been 5 years since al-Baghdadi has shown his face to the world. Why now?
Well, I think in some cases it's a way to show proof of life. There was some suspicions as to whether he was still alive. The reports about 2 years ago was that he was severely injured in an attack. Clearly today he's showing himself. He looks a little bit heavier. He looks like he's doing well compared to the images we saw 5 years ago. But it also comes in light of the catastrophic collapse of the so-called caliphate, the physical headquarters of ISIS in Raqqa, Mosul, you name it, all across Syria and Iraq. And this is a way to show his followers that the group is still alive, he's still alive, and he's continuing to urge his followers to carry out terrorist attacks around the world. And in fact, in one of the sound bites, he says, this battle between Islam and the Christian world is a very long battle. And that's what he's telling his followers.
Yeah, George, this new video, as you mentioned, comes after the supposed collapse of the caliphate last month. Does that mark a resurgence for the terrorist group?
Well, let's keep this very, very clear here. Yes, they lost their physical headquarters, but the ideology resonates. I mean, it resonates all across the world. The figures are close to about 45,000 people went to the battlefield in Syria and Iraq. Half of them lost their lives. The other half have come back, whether it's to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, France, Great Britain, the United States, all across Southeast Asia, parts of Africa. And now the question is, are various intelligence services keeping a close eye on them? Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, just a couple of days ago, he made the following quote. He said, in relation to radical Muslims, they're moving from radicalization to attack in weeks or even days, not years, online and in encrypted messaging forms. This is the reality. It's that ideology that is still very much alive around the world.
All right, George, real quickly here on a separate terror-related issue. What can you tell us about the foiled terror attack in L.A.?
And to this very point, we have a gentleman who was arrested today as he was talking to an informant. His name is Mark Domingo. He was a former Army vet who served in Afghanistan, and he apparently wanted to blow up an explosion at a white supremacist rally that was supposed to take place this past weekend. Obviously, that did not happen, but he was planning multiple attacks against various targets, including wanted to target Jews, churches, and police officers.
All right, George Thomas, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, after the Sri Lanka attacks on the churches and this weekend's synagogue shooting, religious freedom is at risk around the world. What a new report says. Today, the Catholic Church called upon the Sri Lankan government to crack down on Islamic extremists, quote, as if on war footing. Last night's candle vigil in Sri Lankan capital of Colombo marks a week after hundreds were killed in 3 church bombings and 3 hotel bombings. The Archbishop there had suspended Sunday Masses indefinitely, and with churches closed, Catholics watched Mass on TV. Police raids and searches continue in the wake of the Easter Sunday bombings.
Well, that attack is a tragic example of the growing problem of worldwide religious persecution.
It also provides an exclamation point for today's annual report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Jennifer Wishon is on Capitol Hill with more.
If you watch the news, you understand religious persecution is a major problem in countries around the world. And now this new report gives us a better understanding of the world's top offenders. Those countries include Iran, Russia, and economic powerhouse China.
So here's a rising power. Its economy is growing bigger and bigger each year. Its military is expanding. It's got worldwide ambitions, and every place it reaches, it's bringing these values of persecution along with them.
So-called Tier 2 offenders include Cuba, Iraq, and America's NATO ally Turkey, which held American pastor Andrew Brunson hostage for nearly 2 years.
One of the things the Commission is really focused on is not only when there are governments perpetrating violence, but when governments are tolerating the perpetration of violence.
This report is unique in that the 9 members of the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom aren't burdened by diplomacy. Unlike many State Department accounts, these observers tell it like they see it.
We believe as a commission that no person of whatever faith they are should have to fear within their house of worship.
For the world's Christians, the situation is especially dire.
Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world, and it's accelerating.
The commission calls on President Trump to appoint a special advisor on international religious freedom, sanction top offenders, and put money toward the State Department's effort to help houses of worship protect themselves.
Churches, which are soft targets, have become targets for terrorists. And so we believe that this would be a very effective role for our government to come alongside these governments to provide the training that would be a combination of the police officers, the law enforcement agencies, the domestic security, along with the houses of worship.
For so many people of faith around the world, finding religious tolerance is increasingly a matter of life and death. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, the pursuit of the American dream and the free market enterprise. Well, it was a big weekend for TV and for film, for both fans of HBO's fantasy series, John here, Game of Thrones, and Marvel's Avengers Endgame. Now, while much of the entertainment world is abuzz with blockbusters and superheroes, there's a new film that's bucking the trend.
That's right, Jenna. Rather than featuring the usual well-known celebrities or Hollywood hype, this film stars America's free market system and comes at a key time in our culture.
Socialism is apparently becoming mainstream.
Socialism. It's one of the buzzwords in the 2020 elections. And everyone from the president.
America will never be a socialist country.
To those seeking the White House,
health care is a human right,
are weighing in. Conservative Arthur Brooks, however, wants people to take a fresh look at its counterpart.
Democratic capitalism has pulled billions of people out of poverty. It is the greatest humanitarian achievement in the history of mankind. 2 billion people have been pulled out of starvation level poverty.
In his documentary, The Pursuit, Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, travels the globe, meeting people from Denmark, Kentucky Coal Country, and even the Dalai Lama. His goal? Finding ways to help people escape from poverty and pursue happiness.
We're in this culture war about capitalism. Should we have socialism or capitalism? And well, that's the wrong argument. That's the wrong discussion. We should be talking about, am I my brother's keeper or am I not my brother's keeper? And if I am, what's the best way to do it? And that's what this film is about.
The 54-year-old Brooks says during his lifetime, the world has witnessed an 80% decline in poverty. He credits capitalism, calling it a miraculous tool for good when based on morality rather than greed.
The point of capitalism is not for me and you to get richer. It's to share the abundance and earn success, the equal dignity of life with other people. And here's the great irony of our times. People in the wealthiest countries in the world are increasingly turning against the very system that's lifted us out of poverty.
He says while people in democratic socialist economies like Denmark appear happy, he discovered what separates Americans is a sense of joy that comes from our self-made will to flourish.
I don't claim to have all the answers.
The film plunges much deeper than simply comparing economic systems. It imagines a better world by exploring ideas like opportunity, prosperity, compassion, and dignity for everyone.
And that film, The Pursuit, releases digitally, if I can say it, on iTunes next month on May 7th.
Yeah, it looks great. All right, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Hope to see you back here tomorrow.